Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel, Truth is Here. I'm Mubbina Hashmi, the hostess of Truth is Here. Since 2015, I've uploaded a number of videos onto YouTube by the internet with the intention of sharing my story with the world, with all of you that is. My story is rather bizarre, shocking and quite worrying, in fact. Excuse me. I'll just let you know I do have a dry cough and it's back. So if I keep breaking up, please do bear with me. Excuse me. Yes, as I was saying, the story itself is rather bizarre. And that's really owing to some rather extreme laws which have been formulated over the last 2 decades or so via the professional regulatory bodies of pharmacy, which are now the General Pharmaceutical Council and the previous organisation which was responsible solely for the regulation of the profession, known as the Royal Pharmaceutical Society of Great Britain. Excuse me. They introduced the Section 60 Pharmacy Order, which is really a piece of legislation that allows the regulatory body to monitor individuals that they believe they have concerns about. Now, they've been doing this ever since I started training, right from the beginning, that is, right at the early stages of my training. At the time, this was informal, not official, and had legally not been endorsed. Excuse me. That was my hunch at the time anyway. Then later on in years to come, my hypothesis was confirmed when an article appeared in the Pharmacist Defence Association, the PDA that is, outlining how the regulatory bodies of pharmacy were in fact monitoring individuals unknown to themselves for months, perhaps years. And that's how the Section 60 Pharmacy Order came into being. Now, I don't want to go into too much detail. I've already done that. Excuse me, in my other video. In this video, I really am going to lay the foundation for some upcoming videos which are all very key to understanding the extreme situation that myself and others have been placed in. Furthermore, I'm hoping to give you real evidence and insight as to why the UK government, the UK establishments, have gone so far to pass such a law that can destroy people's lives, not just my own. Excuse me. So, to cut a long story short, I'll just go over each key area. I'll do this briefly because each topic is rather elaborate, and I know it's taking me a rather long time to get these videos out there. I apologise for that, I really do, but my circumstances are very, very dire. Excuse me. And the Section 60 Pharmacy Order has disrupted and practically destroyed all my life. So, not just mine, but other people's as well. So it's really a struggle, excuse me, to be doing these videos and to be doing them justice and to get them out there. I'm very, very almost pedantic when it comes to getting my details right and the information that I'm giving you correct. And so I keep holding back, but I thought the best way to actually get some idea of what's to come out there would be to do this video today, which is really an overview of the videos that are coming. So without any further ado, let me start. The first area will be talking about a very prominent case which took place going back 20 years ago when I commenced my training in Carmarthen, West Wales General Hospital, as a trainee hoping to qualify as a pharmacist. This case, everyone will know about it, and if you don't worry, I'll tell you what it's about. Excuse me. That's a stress-related cough, so you can get an idea as to the kind of stress and duress I've been under for the last 20 years at least. The case is the Dr Harold Shipman Enquiry. Dr Harold Shipman was described as Great Britain's most prolific serial killer. He killed at least 250 patients by injecting them with lethal doses of morphine-type substances. Excuse me. And basically killed his patients. That inquiry formed the basis of the Section 60 pharmacy order and excuse me, the need to regulate healthcare professions in general within the UK. Secondly, I need to talk about the persecution of my family, relatives and friends. Excuse me. I've mentioned my friend within the pharmacy profession who resides in London and has also been basically had her life destroyed by the Section 60 pharmacy order. She and I were both at university together. That's at the UCL School of Pharmacy in London. Excuse me. And we both qualified as pharmacists in 1999. I currently am not registered as a pharmacist, and I believe my friend is also in the same situation. I'm not sure, because she did reapply excuse me, some time ago, but because of the aggressive nature of the law, she wasn't able to actually go back into her profession. So, excuse me, just to give you an idea of how ridiculous the Section 60 pharmacy order is, my friend was working in a leading teaching hospital in London, in central London, and one of the things she was accused of was stalking a middle-aged married man with children. I mean, it doesn't matter how old he was, but the point is he was already married, and she was depicted as some kind of a deranged younger female, passionate about an older man. Now, as far as I know, I don't think the story is really like that, but that's how she was depicted, and consequently she was sectioned off in a mental hospital, that being one of the reasons given. I was also accused at the same time, roughly, of having an infatuation with a middle-aged married man with children, and that's been one of the things they've used against me as well. I mean, it really is bizarre, and anyone who's thinking in their right minds will be able to see that the professional regulatory bodies of pharmacy have taken it upon themselves to become the emperor with no clothes. Do you all know the story about the emperor with no clothes? It's a story about a king who rules, and everyone can see how ridiculous his kingship is, but nobody says anything. And that is how the establishments of this country have become, at least. I think, unfortunately, there's something of an epidemic of that in the world, and I personally believe it needs to stop. So that was my friend's situation. My own family, closer to home, my niece, a younger person in her late teens, back in 2016, was trying to apply for a bank, excuse me, a bank account with Santander here in Bristol. She submitted, excuse me, her application online, and it was rejected. Now, the application process should take no more than a few days, possibly a few weeks, no more than that. This was her first bank account application. Excuse me. So she was rather keen to get it sorted out. They then resumed, Santander that is, to request that my niece reapply and keep reapplying and resubmitting her documents for a staggering 13 months. Had I not intervened at this point, along with her mother, and actually accompanied her to the bank in Cabot Circus, excuse me, I think my young niece would still be resubmitting her documents online. I was so appalled by this setup that I just felt embarrassed and very angry that they could do this to her. Excuse me. My niece is a rather pleasant girl. She at school she did very well, scoring fantastic results in her GCSEs. She got 9 A's and some B's as well. So they can't claim that she's suffering from a mental illness and wasn't able to submit her application in the correct way, or try and label her with some other illness, like I think they're doing with members of my family. It is shocking, and I really did have to do this video and put the evidence out there. Excuse me. So more of that later. 3. Excuse me. I've managed to work very little in my profession of pharmacy, only 4 years out of 20 as a pharmacist. And the 2 or 3 jobs I've had as a dispensing assistant, following on from the removal of myself as a pharmacist from the register, have been very, very harmful to myself, in that I've been very, very badly bullied and shouted at by senior members of the profession in a manner that would have easily struck somebody else off had they spoken to anyone else in that way. This is the level at which this government has stooped to, and it's really it's really catastrophic that it hasn't been stopped. These individuals are under instruction. They are being threatened perhaps at a more personal level, and so they don't want to say no excuse me, to the CEO of the company for which they are working. And so they've quite happily shouted at me when I've come in and done a fantastic job of ensuring that the patients get the correct medication, rather than the bogus medication that was going to be handed out to them by members within the company. Medication with false instructions, or the wrong dose. Of course, this is terrible, and anyone who tries to make sure that an intervention is made and the patient gets the right medicine should be applauded, if anything, not shouted at, and certainly not told to leave and get out, as I've been told to. I have full evidence of all of this, which is the embarrassing thing for the company, and so do they. So they shouldn't have done this to me. Just working anywhere has been terrible. I managed to work in a few factory jobs, warehouse jobs, over the last few years. I worked for Royal Mail as a Christmas casual. That's just a temporary role over the busy Christmas period. And on one occasion, back in 2016, I was working alongside a team of permanent workers for Royal Mail who excuse me, were rather pleasant with myself, thankfully, and complimented me on my competency and said I was really good. What were we doing? We were just sorting out the mail, the parcels and the letters into the correct postcodes and putting them into various locations. Excuse me. It was my first day on this particular station, on this role, when the manageress came and said to me, I've been asked to make you work on your own. She felt it was wrong to do this to me, and I was indignant, and so were the other people. They said, she's good. But she said, I know, but that's what I've been told to do by a more senior manageress. So this is the kind of behaviour you get from any company that's under instruction from the Royal Society and the General Pharmaceutical Council, of course. I hope also to be, excuse me, speaking about the Egyptian cleric and his wife and the 9/11 event, the World Trade Center and Twin Towers bombing or crashing, call it what you will, that took place in September the 11th, on September the 11th, 2001. It's very relevant that you should know, all of you, that I was actually born on 9/11, and before the actual bombings, crashings, excuse me, the Egyptian cleric was researching my birthday and had inquired about my birthday from a professional astrologer who used to live here in Bristol, but has since passed away. He and his wife were inquiring about my birthday, and he announced that I was going to be very, very big. He also spoke to me on the phone and told me something along these lines. His leading disciple telephoned me and told me what he had said about this lady being very, very big. Excuse me. And I mean, that kind of gives you an idea of their involvement. It's long been said that Muslims were responsible, Muslim terrorists were responsible for the 9/11 crashings, and nobody's hesitated to pick out Mohammed Attar. I don't know who he was, but he was one of the terrorist suspects, etc., and a few others. But this is very, very significant information. An Egyptian cleric and his wife, who are overseas students living in the UK, working and studying at Cambridge University, which is one of the leading universities in the world. His wife was completing a PhD in economics, for goodness sake. And we all know that the World Trade Center is at the heart of the economy, not just in the United States, but in the whole world. On top of this, these two, excuse me, mysteriously disappeared from England to Washington, D.C., and I was told by his disciples, the Egyptian cleric's disciples, that they may never come back and nobody can get in touch with them except for his disciples. They've gone there to finish off his wife's PhD, so that was the reason given. Excuse me. So that will also give you an idea as to how close I really wasn't to him. Unlike them, I didn't spend my days and nights travelling with him several times overseas, living with him overseas, going to his house and spending the night there when he invited them for religious gatherings or whatever their gatherings were. I didn't do this once. In fact, I didn't even attend 90% of an all-female gathering here in Bristol, which they used to hold on a weekly basis. And I definitely didn't know he was leaving the country to possibly settle down in America or whatever he was going to do there. Excuse me. Despite this, his wife and he are very keen to impose him on me as though he and I had a more serious relationship, when in fact we didn't. And his girls, his disciples, they had taken allegiance with him and had a much more involved relationship. I had only spoken to him mostly over the phone and once properly face to face. So I really didn't have that knowledge that they had of him and his activities and what he was really about. Excuse me. So more of that later on, hopefully. I've mentioned the women who have been murdered, who have my details: the late Marwa Shabini, the late Joanna Yates, and the late Nahida Mania. And the plight of Dr. Afi Siddiqui, who was the neuroscientist charged with being an accomplice to the 9/11 crashings in America in 2001, despite the evidence definitively proving that she couldn't have been anything like that. Excuse me. This lady's story shocks me and disgusts me. She has a lot of details that resemble that of mine. And like I said, I was born on 9/11. She was charged with 9/11. And it's really frightening for me to have seen this happen. Excuse me. Her son still hasn't been returned, her youngest son, by the FBI, by the United States government. And it's not surprising that the 9/11 job was an inside job, because the government is able to behave like this with normal civilians, children even. Excuse me. Now, why were they infatuated with myself, the Egyptian cleric and his wife? Well, there was a prophecy of some kind going back into the 90s, before I knew him and his wife. Excuse me. That I would be associated with some very, very significant leadership. And from what I gather, he and his wife were very keen to bring themselves into the picture, excuse me, and claim that leadership for themselves. He was very sure of himself as well, and was trying to formulate some kind of a pseudo-marriage with myself. So I found myself having to consider marrying him, which is rather a remote proposal, if we want to call it that. Excuse me. Luckily, my parents, my guidance from God, didn't allow me to have any real physical contact with him other than in the public and over the phone. Excuse me. But this man and his wife were absolutely sure that the marriage suitor that was really intended for me would be somebody very significant. And his predecessors back in the 90s were also rather convinced of this, having studied some of my, I don't know, star signs, perhaps, occult science, mystical religious science, something of that nature. So that brings me on to my final subject, which is